In South Africa, pressure is not having a job. Pressure is one of your close relatives being murdered. Rugby shouldn't be something that creates pressure on you. Rugby is something that should create hope. Welcome to the JOEpan Rugby Show, brought to you by Sports Joe in association with Air Sport. I'm Rob O'Hanrahan and here to take a look back at the final of the 2019 Rugby World Cup is former Munster and Ireland hooker Gerry Flannery. The words at the top of the show are of course from Springboks coach Rassie Erasmus in the wake of one of the most memorable days in rugby history. South Africa are world champions. They defeated England comprehensively on a scoreline of 32 points to 12, securing their third Webb Ellis trophy and their first since 2007. England were left battered and bruised by a dominant Springboks pack, and for them, the search goes on for their first world title since 2003, and that makes it the second time in 4 tournaments that they have lost to South Africa in the tournament decider. Gerry, no one gave South Africa a hope going into that final. Not many gave them a hope going into the World Cup itself. They were deserving champions on Saturday. They blew England off the park.
Yeah, I probably thought that England had more, and they showed they had more through the tournament. But Rassie and the Boks, they stayed true to what they were doing in their game plan. They didn't deviate from it. They just executed it even better than they had done previously up to that point, and they were comprehensively the winners. You know.
They executed their game plan, but it felt like there was more to them. And it was striking in the opening few minutes and the way they were attacking England, and particularly in the opening kind of few phases, that there was more to them. They were more dynamic going forward. The passing was a bit slicker. They looked almost like a very different team to the one we saw defeat Wales and defeat Japan.
Well, the game plan didn't change whatsoever. I think the fact is that all the way through the tournament, their kicking game has been pretty strong. Their defence has been phenomenal. Their set piece has been excellent. I think the difference was that up until that final, Pollard and Leroux, the two main creators within the team, and to a lesser extent, Delende and JOEpan at 12 and 13, they hadn't been firing. They hadn't been creating, but they were far more efficient in their movement, and they were far more effective in how they were launching attacks. Willie Leroux in particular, moving out the back of pods and just the handling, like you said. And something that when I rewatched it, I watched how well they handled Leroux and Pollard, specifically looking to get kicks away. The accuracy, their kick accuracy was outstanding, given the pressure that they were on. If you watch how they manipulated their bodies to get the kicks away and still have really, really accurate outcome from it was really impressive. So I don't think that it was that they suddenly decided to play in the final. I think that was always part of the plan, but they just weren't executing it.
One thing that didn't change from a lot of their previous performances was the physical and attritional nature of the game, particularly in the opening 20 minutes. Now, there were a few players lost, and a lot has been made of the loss of Kyle Sinclair for England in the second minute. That was a bit of friendly fire. Cracked his head off Maro Itoje's elbow going in for a 2-man tackle. How important was his loss to England? Would it have been a different game? He's been crucial to them the whole tournament.
Yeah, look, undoubtedly, like Sinclair was phenomenal. Not only is he a fantastic prop, which would have shored up a lot of their set piece, because they didn't have any set piece issues throughout the tournament until that final, but his handling around the field, the way passing forwards create space, and Sinclair in particular taking the ball and playing little tip-ons, playing circle passes, popping the ball out of the tackle, keeping the ball alive and keeping defences guessing. I thought he was outstanding there. And look, him going off, and the way the game played out in terms of the fact that England didn't want to put the ball off the field because they didn't want to empower the South African game by giving them lineouts, giving them mauls. So whenever England kicked, they just kicked long, and South Africa just ran the ball back. So that meant that because there was fewer lineouts, I think England had 8 lineouts in the game. They lost 1. South Africa had 6. That meant that there's going to be a scarcity of lineouts. So what's the next source of possession is going to be the scrum. So then the fact that there was so much emphasis on the scrums and the fact that South Africa were so dominant there was a huge, huge point in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the scrum, I don't think I've ever seen in such a high-profile, top-level game one scrum be so destroyed by another. Like South Africa won 6 penalties from 9 of their own put-ins. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that. You'd have a good insight into this. Like it's your position, it's your role as a forwards coach as well in times gone by. Like this is If you're watching your team doing that, what went wrong for England? Was it the loss of Sinclair? Was it just the dominance of the South African pack? They weigh 20 kilos less than the English pack.
Yeah, look, I think the South Africans are going to go into the game, and the points are on the slow poison game plan. Slow poison is like we are gonna maul at line out time all the time. We are going to scrum, and we're going to scrum for penalties. So it's like you're trying to build that lactate in the opposition's legs. If England have been used to quick tempo lineouts, moving the ball and getting around the field, ball in, ball out at scrum time, and then South Africa are saying, well, we're gonna scrum for penalties. So we're gonna put the ball in, we're gonna hold it there, and we're gonna scrum for maybe 12 seconds, if 12 to 15 seconds, see if we can get a decision. If not, then we'll play off it. When we get the ball into the line out, we're going to pack them all, and we're just going to keep mauling it for as long as we can. So it's not that it bites you in the first 20, 30 minutes. It's in the last quarter that players and hence that's why they go with a 6-2 split, so that they can keep that up all the way through. But their scrum was, I couldn't get over how good it was. It's difficult when you're watching it on a TV angle. There's a couple of times Dan Cole was definitely in trouble. I think Vunipola got penalised as well for, I think, either a hinge or just losing his feet on Malherbe. But by and large, they were just so much as a unit. Intawira, the Lucid had a fantastic game, but they were just so powerful and they were so cohesive. When they snapped, as in when they looked to go forward, you could see all 8 forwards perfectly in unison and really good shape throughout.
Yeah, but you're right. Like, it was something like 15 to 20% of the game was actually spent in the scrum, which is huge, and very few teams can cope with that. Something that struck me about it, though, was that so many or at least half of the scrum penalties were tight calls in terms of who was actually going down and who was actually at fault. Did England just get on the wrong side of Garcés? Like, it's easier for a referee when one side is dominant and the scrum goes down to just award it one way. There were a couple that seemed to be like that.
There was a couple, but I think the initial 3-4 penalties that were South Africa awarded were all clearly, I saw like Dan Cole, you could see he's clearly struggled. He's either got he's overextended in that he's got his legs so far back that his legs are almost straight. So then if your legs are almost straight, you can lock the scrum out. But if the opposition come with a good shunt, you've nowhere else to go. You're gonna lose your shape. You're gonna get your shape broken, and that happened a couple of times. And that's obviously going to form a little bit of an impression in the referee's head if he sees the South African loosehead being dominant over the South African over the English tighthead. He's going to go, well, okay, they're dominant. Then when it comes to like a 60-40 or a 50-50, he generally goes with the team that he's favoured to start with. But I felt like the first 3 to 4 penalties anyway were quite clear cut in South Africa's favour.
Yeah. Last one on the scrums, because I found it very interesting that there were so many penalties and we didn't even see a warning from Garcés. Like, could England have boxed on that a little bit clever, or even South Africa? South Africa weren't pushing for the card. If Dan Cole had been sent to the bin, it would have been uncontested scrums, and that would have taken a huge weapon out of South Africa's arsenal.
Yeah, it would have, but it would have meant as well then that the South African pack, which was dominant over the English pack, is now playing against 7 players. So at the time, like if you're Neil Hatley or if you're Eddie Jones and you're on the sideline, you're not gonna, after you've conceded the first 2 scrum penalties, you don't think like, oh, our scrum is falling apart here. You think like that maybe the lads just lost focus or something like that, because it's not something that we've seen before, which is what made it so surprising. So if England had gone into the game and thought our scrum could be under the pump massively here against South Africa, then you could see they might be prepared for that and saying, well, okay, they'd lost Sinclair, Dan Cole isn't getting the job done here, Mako Vunipola seems to be struggling as well. We might try and get him off the field and go to uncontested, but I don't think that would have been in their mindset.
England did win their own scrum penalty in the 50th minute in the 50s, and it seemed like a real missed opportunity for them. They scored from that penalty from the kickoff. Then Pollard slipped and was pinged at the breakdown, and they had another chance, and that would have brought the game back to 3. And you could just feel from the noise of the crowd, from what was happening on the pitch, that this was England's chance, and they missed it. This was a real missed opportunity for England as well as South Africa did play. Yeah.
Well, look, Pollard missed kicks as well. I think you're right in terms of there was some key moments in the game. There was that period towards the end of the first half when England were peppering the South African line, and you look like if they get a score here, because England had uncharacteristic amount of handling errors up to that point, and they looked nervous. They'd obviously lost Sinclair. They were conceding penalties at scrum, and the South African were winning everything in the air. And he thought, like, if England get a score here, that'll give them the belief. And the fact that South Africa kept them out there was a big momentum swing. And the same with Farrell missing that kick. But that's that you got to take those chances in a final.
Talk to me about that 4-minute phase of pressure that South Africa had in the line. So they were 6-3 down, England at the time, on South Africa's line. There were actually 16 South African men on the pitch there because Jacques Nienabar was pretty much in the dead ball zone. Why is he allowed to do that? I understand he's a qualified physio, but he's more than that. Like, that allows him to relay a serious amount of messages to the players. He's a huge addition to that coaching ticket.
Yeah. Jacques is like, for those people probably wouldn't. He doesn't have a massive profile in world rugby, but he's Jacques Nienabar. He's the defence coach with the Boks, and he came, and I learned an awful lot off him in Munster, and just in terms of what it is to be a coach and the craft that is behind what he does. And he's a phenomenal coach. He's probably the best coach I've ever come across. He's just brilliant. But he's also a qualified physiotherapist, so he's allowed to be right on the sideline so he can relay in messages. They're not coming second hand. The majority of the times, coaches will get they'll probably get like a player who's not involved in the 23 because they'll have sat in the meetings during the week. They'll understand the messages that the coaches are trying to get on. But when you've got Jacques there on the sideline, he will have teed up, okay, who are the danger men for England? What are the cues or what are the triggers around certain power plays that England look to launch? And then he's seeing that on the field, and he's shouting that message directly firsthand onto the box. So he is a massive advantage there, and they definitely they'd be foolish not to take advantage of it. And
even like there was more to that than obviously his physical presence, but there was a moment when Courtney Laws ran straight down Cheslin Colby's channel, and you're looking at 5'7", 70 kilos, and he took him down without an issue. Like, that's in all this talk about, I suppose, like big, huge rugby players and monsters running at you. Technique actually plays such a huge role. That's obviously down to him as well.
Yeah. Like I said, the craft that's behind how he layers his approach is pretty phenomenal, and he works on. It's not just about, like, defense is all about systems, but like he's working on individually developing each player technically, making them a better, making their tackle entry even better, and. I thought that period where when England were hammering the South African line, if you look at the tackle entry is in like the shape of the body shape of the South African players going into each tackle, they are absolutely trying to initiate the contact and drive through it. They're not trying to just get the contact and then soak a little bit. They're trying to win that collision every single time. And whether it's Cheslin Colby or whether it's Eben Etzebeth, the biggest guy in the field or the smallest guy in the field, they're all doing it consistently. And that's down to Jacques just layering that in and developing. And all of those players are technically going to be far better defensive players as a result of working with Jacques.
One of the biggest things that's been talked about has been the 6-2 split, and you mentioned it there, and the slow poison game from South Africa. Rassie Erasmus spoke quite openly about it in the press conference afterwards, and he said that the idea behind it was that this is a long tournament, it's 7 weeks. What we can do is take players off in the 45th minute because we can replace all of our tight five. And then that advantage that it gave them over the course of the tournament, considering they were also coming up against a team that played a game less when England's game against France was called off at the pool stages. It's a really clever thing to do, but why didn't more teams do it then? When you consider, like, say for example, when they came up against Wales and they came up against Japan, why isn't something that more teams adopt? Why is a 6-2 split so seen as being so radical?
Well, the 6-2 split suits South Africa as well, because the majority of our game is going to be really like a 10-man game where it's a pack of forwards who are doing the majority of the work. You have your 9 and your 10 who are looking to launch your kicking game, and maybe your 15 if he's stepping up as a first receiver. They're not looking to play so much. So Japan probably need to have the ability, and it also comes down to depth. Like the depth of forwards that South Africa can draw on is that they can have Malcolm Marx or Mbonambi, they can have Intuira, or they can have Stephen Kitchoff or Vincent Koch or Franz Miller. They have the quality so for them, Rassie's confident that, okay, I can take off these 6 forwards and I can bring on 6 forwards that are equally as good, and we're not going to have a drop off in style. A lot of other teams probably don't have that depth that the South Africans have, and there is a tax as well to having to play that slow poison game, because it is it's very much an attritional game, and there's a cost on your forwards, and you want to make sure that you're capitalising in the last quarter. If other teams are always moving the ball, when Japan played South Africa, if Japan are just constantly just playing this high tempo game, collision move the ball, and then suddenly they get into this arm wrestle with South Africa, like where South Africa are just mauling them, scrumming them. They're not used to it, and it takes a big toll. South Africa are able to ramp that up by being able to bring on six new forwards who just keep going with that, and teams really struggle with it. Now it's predictable, and people think it's not an attractive brand of rugby, but it is effective, and it's very hard to stop.
Yeah. I said at the top of the show, this is one of the most memorable days in world rugby. I thought it was interesting that Francois Pienaar, the 95 winning captain, said that this South African side success was bigger than 1995. Desmond Tutu said it was a victory that can boost a self-doubting nation. It felt like one of the most important moments in rugby and in South Africa's history.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it. If you look at it from the English perspective, Eddie Jones has taken that English team, he's brought them together, he's developed them, he's made them fit. They're playing really, really attractive brand of rugby, and they can play pragmatic when they want, but they have the players, they have the football that they can play expansive as well. So England were in a really good place going forward, and England, based on how they'd gone through the tournament, you could say, oh, these guys, they're well within a shout, they're very worthy champions if they do win it.
Yeah.
But I don't think English rugby is going to go backwards now off the back of that. Whereas South African rugby, if you look at from where they'd come when they dropped down the world rankings, losing, I think it was 8 out of 12 games, losing to Italy, the Japan loss at the last World Cup, which is unheard of for a team as strong as South Africa traditionally. And then for Rassie and Jacques to come in 18 months out from that World Cup. And I knew from a lot of the South African players who come to Munster, and from chatting to the lads who are from South Africa, they'll say to you, the country is really in a, it's teetering, it's politically, it's really hot over there, and economically it's not going so well either. So South Africa needed this World Cup. They really needed it, and for Rassie to come back in, and within 18 months to turn it round, to get so many things right that in South African rugby, that will, even if they hadn't won this final, South African rugby would be in a better place for the changes that Rassie put in place. Yeah. And I'm sure previous coaches that were with South Africa are probably a little bit envious of, they didn't have the same resources available to them that Rassie managed to negotiate with the South African Rugby Union when he came in terms of being able to have better interaction with all the players, getting, having a full-handed selection with the players who were playing abroad. But South Africa really needed this, and that's why, to come together to win it, and for what it's done for the country now. I'm getting WhatsApps from Felix Jones. He's just shown me how crazy the country is going and how proud they are now.
Yeah. You say that England rugby won't go back, and then you also mentioned resources. There's one thing I want to focus on now is...
I know where this is going.
Yeah, well, look, let's be honest, this is bigger than Bloodgate with Harlequins. This is one of the biggest stories in club rugby that I think we've ever seen. So Saracens have been deducted 35 points, and they've been given a £5.3 million fine for breaking the salary cap. The advantages that Saracens team have had, and how they've built effectively what is the spine of England's World Cup team. And to be perfectly honest, it's arrogance, it's unfairness, it's cheating, it's financial doping, and it's finally been, I suppose, brought into the public domain. Yeah,
it's the ramifications for European rugby are massive here, because I know from my time competing against Saracens, they are a phenomenal club. They have great coaches. If you speak to any player who's been through the Saracens system, they can't speak highly enough of the place. But you would it's frustrating. You play them and you lose. We've lost to them. I've lost to them twice, and they're a top class team. But you would wonder. We used to question how they were able to to get like the starting loose head for the British and Irish Lions, the starting tight head or starting hooker for the British and Irish Lions, have the tight head from the Boks, Vincent Koch, having the 2 English locks who are on the British and Irish Lions who are Toje and Cruz, Billy Vunipola, like probably England's best forward. They had Schalk Berger on the bench when we played last time, who, you know,
On the bench,
yeah. Having Ben Spencer there, like the sub scrum half for England in the final, having Owen Farrell, you know, Brad Barrett. Lewington was very unlucky not to make the squad. Liam Williams, one of the British and Irish Lions 15. Elliot Daly, the English 15, and then you've got Good as well in there. You know, it's a phenomenal squad, and you wonder, like, because as a coach you're trying to see how you build your roster, and you know, like, players' wages are going, you know, they're going one way. So look at, it's in a way, if they you have to have financial fair play through the league, and I suppose for the likes of Exeter, who I suppose they go and sign Stuart Hogg, but then they have to release Cordero as a result to stay within the salary cap. That it's very frustrating for them. Now there is no salary cap in Europe, but you know, it's an enormous disruption now to Premiership.
Well, Tony Rowe, the Exeter Chief CEO, said they should be relegated. That, to be perfectly honest, this actually isn't enough of a punishment. 35 points isn't enough to send them down. It'll probably stop them from getting into Europe next year, assuming they don't win the Champions Cup. Are they actually being punished enough? Because, let's be honest, there's a possibility that without this stuff in the last few years, England wouldn't be at a World Cup final. There's the potential that we would have had a Munster-Leinster Champions Cup final, and the knock-on effect that would have had. We obviously would have won the World Cup if we'd done that. There is a knock-on effect. This isn't just about the Premiership. This is the Champions Cup. This is the World Cup. This is affecting rugby throughout the entire world. They need to be made an example of.
Yeah, I think 35 points and a £5 million fine is being made an example of. That's pretty drastic. I was trying to figure out myself what will the domino effect from this be if for instance the 35 points is upheld. If the £5 million and the £5 million fine, I'm sure that they have enough wealthy people in the club that they can find the money for that. But if they're in breach of the salary cap now, they must still be in breach of the salary cap right this season. So when they have all their players return, you know, they'll still have the best squad in Europe, if not World Rugby. Will they have to get rid of some of these players, or can they have a group that plays? Because the only way, if they're going to be fined 35 points or deducted 35 points, then they're not going to win the Premiership. Probably won't qualify for Europe. So then the only way they can get back into Europe the following year is by winning the European Cup, which they're well capable of. When any team sits down and prepares and say, we want to target win the Champions Cup, well, Saracens are the team that you're going to be chasing there. And when you look at the quality that they have, because that's what actually dictates it, the teams that win the European Cup are the teams that have the best players generally, always. Like if you look at, like when Leinster won the European Cup, they probably had 9 of the Irish starting 15. When Saracens won, they probably had 9 to 10 regular international starters. We had 4 regular international starters with Munster. You would have had Conor Murray, Keith Earls, Peter Manny and CJ Stander. That's 4. When Munster won the European Cups in the past, they would have had 9 regular international starters. So looking at the quality that's there in the Saracens team, that's the benchmark that everyone else is working to. So I suppose then to learn that roster has been potentially assembled illegally or not within the rules is I suppose it's giving everyone else a little bit of hope, but we don't know what way this is going to happen. Can Saracens still keep their roster and just use certain players in Europe where there is no salary cap, and can they have a second squad for the Premiership? I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how this one plays out. Thanks, Jerry. That is all we have time for on this episode of the JOEpan Rugby Show, brought to you by Sports Joe in association with Air Sport. We will be back a little bit later on this week as the 14th and final episode of the show. We'll see myself and Jerry sift through the last 7 weeks of rugby action as we pick our team of the tournament. We'll see you then.